Well, shall we go ahead and get started?
Totally.
Hey everyone, I'm Paige Dukes. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm joining from Atlanta. Welcome to the second session of our Art and Agency conversation, a discussion that started over the summer about ethics, exploitative practices, a community building conversation really, discussing our responsibilities to each other and to the JAC community. I'm joined tonight by my co-facilitator, Anuj, with the Restorative Justice Initiative in New York. Also by my fellows in the working group, Amy and Kamisha of the Returning Artists Guild in Ohio. And also with, I see several people returning from our last conversation. Thank you so much for joining us again. You can learn more about the Art and Agency project and all of the artists in our working group at the Art and Agency page on the JAC site. As I said, my name is Paige Dukes, and I'm a communications associate at the Southern Center for Human Rights in Atlanta. I'm also a founding member of Liberatory Memory and Writing Projects Mourning Our Losses and Georgia Freedom Letters. And a common theme along all of my work is trying to correct and shift the narrative around people in prison and to try and give voice to people's stories in their own words. Often the only way that people learn about what's going on in prisons and the people living in them is through the media. And media narratives, as we know, are often skewed, and the only accurate representation is first-person representation. So the way that we think about each other influences the way that we regard each other and the way that we treat each other, which is has a common mission with this project. And I'm going to turn it over to Anuj, who will give us some community guidelines. Actually, first, Amy and Kamisha, do you guys want to talk a little about yourselves and Returning Artists Guild?
Hi, I'm Amy. Kamisha, you can unmute too and help me out. We are the co-founders of the Returning Artists Guild. It is a loose collaboration of currently and formerly incarcerated artists, primarily in Ohio, but nationally as well. And essentially we've been, curating pop-up events and kind of working on representing our artists in galleries and professional development and things like that, but mostly just like community building with our people. So it's kind of where we're at and what we're doing. Kamisha, you can add on.
Yep, we are, as Amy mentioned, a group of formerly and currently incarcerated artists across all disciplines. We've got a little bit of everything in our group. I personally, my primary medium is film and storytelling. Amy's visual artist. We have singers, rappers, sculptors, just the whole gamut within our group. And we are here to continue the conversation that was started over the summer and ultimately come up with a code of ethics that we are working on for everyone that we hope will be adopted, across the nation. So it's nice to be here. It's nice to meet with you all, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have.
Thank you guys. And yes, thanks to all of you for contributing to this conversation, which is going to lead us to this really useful tool to lead from a personal ethics towards a community ethics. I also want to give Carol space, who's in our working group, to introduce herself if she's on the call. Carol, are you here? Hey, Carol.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yes, my name is Carol Alden. I was incarcerated for 13 years for self-defense in a domestic violence situation. And when I got out, I didn't, there was really no place for me to be. So after a variety of errors, I ended up being able to get a hold of 80 acres out in the desert. And I'm in the process of building a studio and my home, and also kind of a sanctuary place for people to come and gather their wits and work on healing trauma through art. And so it's called the Desert Fish House Project, Hope and Healing Project. And I'm in Utah. And anyway, that's what I'm working on. And I'm also on my way to rescue a traumatized rooster right now. So it's been a full day.
Carol, thank you. I'm so glad you could join us. Thanks, Wendy, for dropping a link to Carol's project. And Anuj, now will you please introduce yourself, the work you do at RJI, and get us started with our community guidelines.
Cool, totally. Hey, everybody, my name's Anuj. It's really good to be back in this space again. And with Paige and Kamisha and Amy, it's really nice to get to continue to collaborate. Yeah, so again, my name's Anuj. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns. I work as a restorative justice organizer, and I come to this space today really as like a thought partner. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some more specifics around restorative justice practice in a little bit. But I used to be the restorative justice coordinator at an immigration and workers' rights agency called Make the Road New York. And currently work as the director of training and youth programs at Restorative Justice Initiative in New York City, and really center community building in this indigenous practice that I think offers us so many ways to not only envision but to manifest a world, a future that is without policing and prisons and surveillance. And so our hope is really to even amidst these conversations we're having today, look at like the little pieces and parts of them that emerge that's like proof of that world already being within us. You know, there's like living proof on this call all around us of things that don't need the prison system in order to thrive and to be curious and to think and be together. And so really wanting to just like hone in on that energy today. We wanted to offer some time for all of you to kind of start getting in conversation with one another. We're going to have a couple breakout groups today. And so before we go into kind of like the meatier questions of those breakout groups and the content of our time together, we just wanted to offer some time for introductions. And so we are going to go into breakout rooms for about 10 or 15 minutes. And these are the prompts. So names, pronouns, also if you want to say where you're at in the world. But what's bringing you to this conversation? And if you were here a few weeks ago at our last conversation, what's bringing you back? Right? And typically, if this was a smaller group, we would spend a lot of time making some collective community agreements, some small group norms that we just want to name. First of all is the idea of active listening. And so this idea, like throughout our hour and a half together, we really want to build a conversation. The idea of equal airtime, knowing that all of us are carrying stories in this space. And also we have the unfortunate limitation of a 90-minute time window. And so just as we share, being mindful of that. Confidentiality, so stories that are shared in the space, the identities and specifics of those stories stay in that space, but feel free to take the lesson learned from it. And finally, speaking from a place of I, which is essential as we go into these conversations about exploitation and ethics. And yeah, so with that being said, Andy, if you are ready to send folks into breakout groups, we're going to spend some time just on introductions, and then we'll bring people back. Paige, do you think like 7:30 sounds good in 14 minutes? Cool, we'll bring people back at 7:30.
I think because I'm a host, it's not automatically sending me to a breakout room. So should I just pop in one?
Whichever
Yeah, I
one
think you can just pick
least-
one. Also, there's the comment that just came in the chat. I would like 3 minutes to talk about C Note. I don't know what that means.
I'm not
I
sure.
don't know.
Okay.
And Anuj, you said that so people are deciding on a note taker for these groups.
Not in this first one. This first one is simply introductions. And then for the second group, we'll ask for a note taker. And
We have specific people like as note takers. I think like already, so I can assign the note takers into the breakout room with.
cool.
Yeah.
That would be great. I think our only concern was wondering if there were enough for the small groups. How many participants are there?
There is enough that if you look at the breakout rooms right now, there's not anywhere between
Cool.
9 or 10 people in each group. So I think for
Yeah.
the actual breakout rooms, do you want to keep it around the 10?
Yeah, I actually think that these same breakout rooms can be used each time if that works.
Perfect.
I think that would allow people to like continue building community from the same conversation. So that would be great. I'm gonna send this link. I'm gonna drop this link in the chat really quickly. But I just quickly put this together so that people could put their notes in for the second question.
For the second question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And then the only thing is that there is one room where someone who has been incarcerated or experienced with that is not a facilitator. And that's right now I have Robin in as a potential facilitator.
Yeah. I think that's fine because we're going to be prefacing each of the rooms. Like we'll have like time to come back together and Paige will be leading like the introduction of the next space. So I think that that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Awesome. Yay.
Cool.
I might end up. I did it purposely so that in each room there is a Jack intern.
Okay.
So, and I think anyone is kind of ready to take notes. So,
Great.
these
That
breakout
sounds
rooms
great.
would be perfect.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna join one of the rooms and I'll be back at 7:30.
Okay, awesome. I'll just watch out in case people are bounced back or anything.
Okay.
also an intern at Jack. I'm on the web and fundraising
Amazing. Welcome back, everybody. Paige, I can't see you, but if you are back, feel free to
I'm
jump
here.
in.
Thank you, everyone. That was a really awesome, rich discussion, even just with our introductions. And I'm so glad that we all had time to get to know each other a little bit better. Ian, I'm sorry if I gave you a heart attack. I just wanted to thank you for volunteering to be a note taker in these breakout sessions. So we had a really awesome discussion already, and I'm really excited to see what else we get into in this session. We had some people that were returning from the first session and some people who hadn't been here at all. So for those of you who weren't able to join us before or to view the recording, I just want to do a small recap of examples of harm that came up in the first session. I shared some of my experience as a formerly incarcerated person who was making music and art and writing on the inside to now being someone who I try to share my platforms with people who are currently incarcerated. And I constantly find myself feeling this tension of, wondering whether what I'm doing is, the best way. One example I gave was when I connect someone with a reporter, they may face retaliation for speaking in the media. And I don't want to chill their communications even further when communications are so surveilled and controlled, but I also don't want to be the reason that someone is retaliated against. So that's just one example. Also, when my friends who are artists want to share their art, and I try to, get it out there to people who can put it on display or put it, up for sale or in a gallery. Like, I want to make sure that I am helping representing them and giving them as much of a say as they would have if they were able to do those communications themselves. And I just realized that if I am having these questions as a person who is formerly incarcerated and who knows what that's like, there must be so many other people who are doing this work who are in the same sorts of situations. And we want to get together and explore those and kind of dig into those issues together, both well-intentioned people and subtle harms that happen, aside from their best intentions, but also just straight up people making you sign shady contracts and stealing your work. So we explored a range of harms. One thing that came up was social media. I was in prison for all of my 20s. So now I am a tech crippled millennial, and I've been playing catch up this whole time. And so I've really had to learn how to use these platforms. Whereas because I was incarcerated before most of them existed, I really wouldn't have understood what it meant for my art to be shared on Instagram, for instance. And so, let alone what I still don't understand are NFTs and ways that people can, share my work if it's not watermarked, or how do you do that if you're incarcerated, or how do you help someone who's incarcerated do that? So this next question is going to help us get further into that, but also how we can define the opposite. So we talked a lot about harms in the last session, and this time we want to talk more about best practices and ways we can define what non-exploitative treatment would be, and giving people agency over their own work and how it is shared.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Paige. I mean, we talked a lot about this idea of building a communal ethic before, in our last session together, and kind of what is able to happen when we actually talk about the day-to-day implications of things like exploitive practices and ways to interrupt them, which is really what this conversation today is centering. But what we're really thinking of is how do we envision ourselves actively having that conversation to be able to both identify and interrupt moments of exploitation, right? And so again, a starting question for that we want to talk about in our small groups is, how do we define non-exploitive treatment of artists and art within your programs? And so we're going to break into small groups to kind of talk about this second question. And so I'm going to post this link in the chat for the note takers in each of the groups. We're gonna be taking collective notes in this document. And so you'll see just the big question at the top of the document, and then written below the different group numbers. And so if you just want to take notes under your group, and for folks who aren't taking notes, if you want to continue to look at this document and kind of just reflect on what's going on in the other spaces as well, that would be amazing. And also when we come back from the small group, we can have a moment of pause for reflections as well. I know that we're spending a lot of time in small groups, so we'll also have some group reflection. But with that being said, we're gonna open up these small groups and invite people to come back at 7:55, so in 20 minutes, well, 7:55 Eastern time.
Can I ask just a quick clarifying question, Anuj? I
Yeah,
see that on the note-taking doc, each room is listed as having a facilitator, but there won't be like formal facilitation of these breakouts, correct? It will be more self-led and loose.
Yeah, totally. It will be more self-led for sure.
Thanks.
Thanks for that clarification, Wendy.
Sure. Hey, Will Livingston, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Are you able to see the thing that says breakout room?
Uh, yes.
Inviting you to click on one and join one? Maybe that's a yes. Hope that's a yes.
He's now
I
in
keep
the
missing the prompts to join a breakout. Now I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I'll just go somewhere.
Well, it says that you're assigned to room 3.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'll go there then. Bye.
Bye, Wendy. Hi, Suchi. I just added you to a breakout room. We're talking about the question of how do we define non-exploitative treatment of artists within programs.
Oh my God. And thank you so much. I live in LA and I just hit like massive traffic. I had to surrender.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Are you seeing a thing show up to join a breakout room?
Yes, I just saw it. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, amazing.
Amazing. So we're talking about, what is the prompt?
The prompt is, how do we define the non-exploitative treatment of artists and art?
In general, not just in relationship to carceral situations.
Yeah, well, we're talking specifically in relationship to the programs that people in the space are involved with. So mostly in terms of its relationship with working with formerly incarcerated and incarcerated artists.
Love it. Yes, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for bringing me in and letting me come in late.
Of course. Good to have you.
Oh, thank you. We'll talk soon, or we'll be back together soon.
Yeah, we'll be back together in 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Of course.
Oh no, Anuj, I didn't mean to go back in here because I was the note taker. I hit oh well.
That's okay. The rooms are closing right now anyways.
Okay.
Everybody will be back in the next 36 seconds.
Okay, that's fine then. I think I got most of what she was saying.
Which group are you?
Group 3.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it looks like the other groups just didn't take notes.
I know. We're recording this, so I'm not gonna say anything crazy.
No worries. We can have people share back very quickly.
Yeah. But this is a great document.
Amazing. Welcome back, everybody. Before I pass it back to Paige, I think I would just love to know, is there anybody who wants to share out any thoughts or ideas that came up for them in the small groups? I know that we have some of the notes taken on the notes document. Some of the groups are still blank. And so just wanted to leave a moment in case there's anybody who wanted to share any reflections from any of the groups.
I was asking a question. I was starting to ask a question in our group and we ran out of time. I was wondering if there are any places in the nation where there's housing for people after they get out of the prison to not just live together, but to live and create together. Is there any artists housing that's provided for people? You know, there's all this, like there's a recovery soldiers place here and it's for anybody who has certain kinds of addiction issues and stuff. And when they get out of the prison system, they go there and then they graduate from there. Is there anything that's like a supportive housing community for people who are artists who have been in prison?
So that's a really good question, Sky. I think that has been on the Returning Artists Guild agenda for a long time, is to work on what does arts-based halfway houses mean, because a lot of the housing supports are sort of faith-based, and that doesn't jive with everyone. There's a lot of different paths that people can take, and I think art is a really important one. So I don't know of any. If anyone else does, please put them in the chat. I would love to know more. I think that's a really important model for people that are working in reentry specifically to explore. So thank you for that.
I have never personally heard of anything like that, but it would be really cool, you know, if there were some kind of communities that were, you know, geared towards that.
Maybe
But like
Carol
you said-
Alden's, maybe Carol Alden will come through with that at the Fish House.
That's what we're working on. You know, I mean, there can be a lot of camping going on 80 acres. We've got a lot of room for projects out there. And I've got, well, there's a couple of people that have started coming out. You know, the biggest problem is working with AP&P and letting people have permission to come to an area that technically, you know, doesn't even have a valid address because we're so far off the grid. And I had an officer come out once, but he got lost trying to get there, just to do a welfare check and see how things were. But I've already had a woman come out 3 times, and she spent a week each time, and she's getting ready to come out again. And it's like an interruption to suicidal tendencies and also relapsing. And it's been helpful for her. And so, you know, as we get bigger and more organized, I think this will be something that people can actually do. But man, it's hard in Utah.
Yeah. And if anybody didn't see it, oh yeah, go ahead.
I imagine, I'm not sure, but that there must be some sort of artist residence for ex-convicts. I'm not sure, but I imagine that exists.
Yeah, residency opportunities. Paige, do you want to do you want to respond to the?
I just said ouch in the chat. I like to use ouch and oops as a tool to remind people to use person first language instead of language that is institutionalized and dehumanizing, which can unintentionally cause harm. And we dropped the link to the Fish House GoFundMe in the chat if you guys want to help Carol with that, make this a reality, because this is a very important example of a practice that would really help to be restorative. And I want to give space for other people to report back. In our group, we had a really amazing discussion. A couple of things that came up was programming for people, not for people, but with people. You know, if you're doing programming for people, that's not as empowering as doing programming with them, and it's not as helpful to people. Another was someone shared that they got college credit for some classes that they took and were able to use that reference and that, you know, that piece of paper to like build a resume upon their return. And that's so important and so simple, right? If people are doing college classes, they should be getting credit for them. That was one thing that I also experienced when I was in prison. And also having mentors, you know, this is going to be a process, just like the language thing has been a process for me. I too used this, you know, harmful language when I first got out because I hadn't thought critically about it and I didn't realize how harmful it was. And I think that goes for a lot of these practices that we're trying to change. It's going to be a process and one that we all have to hold each other accountable for. And having mentors, people who have come before you and have, you know, experienced things and can help guide you is really, really important. And also passing that knowledge on to other people who are coming into it.
Yeah, and just to more specifically offer something that's even written in the notes as an alternative for language is specifically the use of the language currently or formerly incarcerated artists. So just stay consistent with that language in the space.
Yeah, I think something, we talked about that in my group as well, and how I've never really comfortably settled on language, but the currently and formerly seems to be the most concise and still allows people that are not involved in the carceral system to understand what community I'm talking about. But I think the part of our conversation that I really enjoyed was we talked about compensation being more than just being paid for a piece of work, but being, you know, possibly paid to show up, paid for time, paid for investment, and just kind of the expertise that returned or incarcerated people are bringing to the table. And also kind of all of the hairy, weird ways that you can and can't pay people that are inside, and kind of how we're working around those barriers. There was a museum that wanted to donate, I think like $700, and that was too much money to donate without like W-9s, but incarcerated folks weren't able to fill out W-9s. So like just those kinds of legal predicaments and thinking through like, how do we level set that on the front end, right? Instead of getting into the situation, but how can we kind of prepare for that and think about those folks and find ways to compensate them, whether it's financially or with supplies or to their families, or what makes the most sense for those people specifically.
I hope this isn't a stupid question. There's a very good chance that it is. I want to get some clarity about the language. Saying currently or formerly incarcerated person is a little bit like a little bulky. And so what language do we not ever want to use because it's institutionalized? Or could somebody send me a little link to how to do this properly?
Inmate, convict, those are words that we just absolutely do not like. Felon, those are offender. Yeah, the list really goes on, but the biggest one is inmate. Like, please do not say that. Like, that is so harmful and so hurtful. It's like, it's almost equivalent to a racial slur. Okay, because the guards in prison will point their finger at you and yell at you, you know, in that way, and use that word, you know, and it's really, really as I mentioned before, it's just all so traumatic, but it hurts really, really bad.
Thank you for being willing to help me with this, because I think I was one of the ouch people. I think I used the word felon when I was saying about, because that's what my cousin says, but that's not right. So I won't do that anymore. And it sounds like there's a lot of words that are just offensive, that are in common parlance, and they hurt.
I think the thing for me in thinking about those terms is that they don't describe a person. They describe a condition. And a word like inmate describes the condition as like a problem of the person rather than the location of the person. So like an artist who is incarcerated, right, describes the person and the location. Currently and formerly incarcerated artist describes the experience and the person, whereas the other ones just feel like a straight up slur.
Yes, thank you so much for dropping the link to Eddie Ellis's letter. This is a letter that was written back in 2005, just asking people to call us people. Somebody mentioned that it's bulky to say formerly incarcerated people. Person first language is always a good way to go, you know, to just call people people. A lot of times we know what context we're talking about when we are discussing artists who are incarcerated, but if it is bulky and it's necessary, like it's still better than stripping somebody of their dignity and their humanity. And I certainly don't want anybody to feel like they're being policed. I want us all to give each other and ourselves grace as we learn to change these deeply programmed way of thinking and speaking. Does anybody else want to report back from your small groups?
Oh, we talked. Yeah. I'm sorry, Anuj, I'll just be real quick. We talked also about the compensation thing and how tricky that can be, and how we here in Ohio, we just work completely around that because we don't want the state taking 30% of our bread. So we just use a authorized person. It's unfortunate that we have to, because part of it feels kind of sneaky, but ultimately they are being unethical. The state is being unethical in the fact that they want to take 30% of this bread that I just made. So no, thank you. I'll definitely give it to my dad and let him do what I ask him to do with it, you know, some trusted authorized person. And we just also talked about including people in the decisions, in the you know, in the creating of the thing, right? So like we had the unique opportunity to create a art therapy program, and it was, you know, we created it. You know, Amy put in the hard work, and we facilitated, and we did it. It was ours. It wasn't theirs. It was ours. So that's really important. When I liked whoever said programming with them instead of for them. You know, that is really important, and that's really impactful. And that is a good way to be, you know, to start the ball in an ethical situation.
Real quick, because she brought up finances, it's often hard to like get around these barriers that people have to getting paid for their work in prison. But I just want to lift up one thing that we got from one of our artists in our working group, Carla. She said that contributing to a cause is super cool, but indigent, destitute, vulnerable people should never be asked to donate. There are no ethical grounds for consent. So she's most motivated to work with the intention and expectation of some form of reciprocity.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that keeps coming up in my mind is just how, like, when we talk about like the true like failure of the state in terms of how much money is poured into maintaining punitive practice as the status quo, it's like in order to even think about what it means to like really be able to pay artists who have been incarcerated or who are formerly incarcerated in a way that is equitable and ethical, it takes so much transparency. you know? And so I think one of the things in my mind is like, what are the little steps that can be made towards that transparency? Because it's so far from what exists right now. I want to acknowledge that we only have about 20 minutes left, and Paige and Amy and Kamisha, do you three have anything else to add? If not, I can kind of transition us to the last question. Okay, amazing. So this last question, we're specifically going to be thinking together around what are methods of intervention available to us. So when we see exploitive practices happening, what are ways that we understand that we can respond? And to kind of ground that conversation, I want to be able to just offer kind of a mosaic definition of restorative justice. And so this is like a 4-part definition that's kind of building like a mosaic definition of restorative justice. I know frequently within institutions, it's referred to as an alternative to punitive discipline or an alternative to punitive practice. Within my own restorative justice practice, I like to put even that definition in this larger framework of what it means to build an interdependent community, right? Response to harm is not really possible without or a community-based response to harm isn't really possible without the foundation of community. And so I share kind of these 4 pieces of a definition just to kind of spark some thought as we go into the small groups. So the first part is that it's an indigenous tradition, a way of being together, and a way of responding to tension, conflict, or harm. And so one of the reasons why, well, a couple of reasons why I think that part of the definition is important is, first of all, to uplift restorative justice and restorative practices as indigenous tradition, and to also say it's a way of response, right? Oftentimes when we look at our prison system and our system of incarceration, what they look for is for numbers of, or what they justify in their continuation of their tools is numbers, right? And oftentimes when people seek what a safe community looks like, they look for numbers of incidents to go down. What restorative justice really asks is for us as a community to think, how do we respond to moments of conflict? The measurement is really, how are we growing to be able to respond together? The second part of this definition is that it's an alternative to punitive, retributive, and reactive norms. And it's a way to move beyond binaries of good and bad, of right and wrong, and to really think what else might exist. And so even when we think about this shift in language, a lot of times when we refer to the most harmful language, it is reinstating this binary of good and bad, right? And it's a lot of language that the state has used, that government has used, that dominant identities in society have used historically for years after years to be able to maintain this idea that there needs to be people labeled as good and people labeled as bad in order for society to progress. And what restorative justice is really asking us to think is that there are many more things to be than good and bad. How can we explore that space together? And then finally, it's really building a world where consequences exist, but they're community-based, right? And people aren't disposable through those consequences, that people through community are actually able to learn paths of transformation together and have that be a community-informed process. And so with that definition, I invite us to think, and again, this is really an open brainstorm. I'm gonna do a quick screen share. I'm gonna drop the link to this in the chat, but this is a Jamboard where we can just put Post-it notes as ideas come up in our group. So if you see the sticky note button, you can write an idea that you have and then click save. And feel free to move it somewhere on the board. But essentially, we're going to be keeping a log of methods, ideas for how we might intervene when we see exploitation, when we see unethical practice arise. Because it's already 8:15, we're probably going to spend about 12 minutes in this group and then do a quick comeback to share. But before we open up the groups, let me just drop the link to this Jamboard in the chat. Amazing. And so, yeah, we'll see you all back in about 12 minutes.
Hello? Hello? Are we, I got bumped out of the room I was in.
Oh,
Yeah.
we're back in the main room.
Oh,
People
okay,
can
I'm
chat.
sorry.
No worries.
Embarrassing.
Cool. So before we close out, I wanted to know if there were any last reflections from that group, whether it was on specific ideas came up, whether it's around the ease or challenge of brainstorming these things, and then of course, Paige and Amy and Kamisha, if you all have anything to say in closing, I also pass it to the three of you.
No,
I just want
our
to.
sorry. Our thing was just, we said ask questions. We were and document, ask questions, and go shoot higher on the food chain when there's a problem. Sometimes that is helpful, sometimes it is not, but it all depends on the totality of circumstances. And I think that those were the main points that we came back with.
Amy, did you have anything to add?
I thought it was an interesting kind of place to leave it, because now my brain is still like thinking about more concrete ways. And I think we all needed probably a lot more time to start thinking about like what are the actual things that we can do. But something that kind of came up was everyone's appreciation for this conversation about language. So that just constantly helps me understand that it is important every time I bring it up or kind of do the ouch piece, because we're all learning and there's a lot of complexities around language that we outside of this issue, that we navigate, right? So this is no different. And I think I'm taking away a lot of excitement, and I'm wondering if there's a potential to kind of set up a way for people to continue to give us feedback or reflections or thoughts, whether that's just like via email or something. I'm not sure. That would probably have to come out in a later communication, but just wondering if there's a way that we can set up a space to continue to kind of receive this input, because I really appreciate everything everyone's bringing to the table, and thank everyone for sharing space with me tonight.
Yes, agreed. Thank you so much to everyone who attended, and someone will drop the Art and Agency email address. This is a way that you can keep in touch with us. And we really appreciate just this rich content that we now have to mine and take back to our working group as we continue this conversation, because this certainly isn't the end of it. And we appreciate your contributing to us eventually getting to this place where we have this tangible tool that we will be able to share and to use, and that will be a living document that will grow. And so thank you so much to everyone. We hope that you will continue to follow Art and Agency, and thanks for the conversations and for the, just everybody's really thoughtful interactions. Thanks to Anuj for facilitating us and for that great information about restorative justice.
Of course. And I guess I also just want to say that, like, if anybody ever wants to chat about what a restorative justice process as like a way of interruption or intervention would look like, in like whatever context you're thinking about it in or working in, that's like a conversation that I'm always open to have. And we've done like a couple trainings and workshops through Jack. And I think our intent is, as this conversation continues, to be able to like get more into the specifics of that tool as a way to respond and to interrupt these behaviors that we see showing up. But just know that I'm happy to be a resource for that conversation and for kind of that bouncing back and forth of ideas of what it looks like to like actually plan and implement that. So yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
Stay safe.
Thank
Take care, everyone.